The morning sun spilled across the perfectly trimmed lawns of Cedar Creek Estates, and for a moment everything seemed peaceful until the sharp metallic scrape of wheels on concrete shattered the calm. Grandma eased her wheelchair down the sidewalk, her hands trembling slightly on the worn grips as she navigated the narrow path that led past rows of identical houses. The faint scent of fresh-cut grass mingled with the crisp autumn air, and for a second she allowed herself a small smile until a piercing scream cut through the quiet. "What do you think you're doing on my sidewalk?" The voice was shrill and furious, and it belonged to Kerren, the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood, who had made it her mission to enforce rules that did not exist. Grandma froze her knuckles white on the handles of the wheelchair as Kerren stormed out her house, her heels clacking against the pavement like gunfire, and in her hand glinted something cold and deadly. "Move that thing right now, or I swear I will," Kerren barked, and suddenly the terrifying realization struck that she was pointing a gun directly at Grandma. I came running from the house, my heart hammering in my chest, my voice shaking with disbelief. "Grandma, get back!" But it was already too late to fear in her eyes mirror my own, and the neighbors had stopped their morning routine staring in horror. The world seemed to slow down as Kerren stepped closer, her face twisted with righteous fury, and the absurdity of the so-called no zone sign became painfully clear. Grandma tried to steady her voice. "Kerren, please, it is just my wheelchair. I am only going to the garden path." But Kerren scoffed and raised the gun higher, her finger itching on the trigger. The wind shifted and rustled the autumn leaves across the perfectly manicured lawns, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Her arrogance radiated like heat from a summer sidewalk, and it was impossible to ignore the raw power she felt she wielded over everyone around her. Stories of her petty tyranny had circulated quietly for years, neighbors whispering about fines she issued for things no one else would notice, about her obsession with control and perfection, and now it had escalated into something much darker. I inched closer, trying to reason, my voice trembling. "Kerren, this is insane. Nobody should be threatened like this." And she laughed, a sound sharp and cruel that made my stomach turn. Her eyes darted between us, and the sign she had planted months ago, a monument to her delusion and pride. Grandma gritted her teeth, trying to mask her fear, her frail hands shaking on the wheelchair handles. "I have lived here for 30 years. I have never hurt anyone." And Kerren's sneer widened. "You think time gives you the right to ignore rules," she spat. "I make the rules in this neighborhood, and you will obey or you will pay." I could see the disbelief etched on the faces of neighbors, peeking through curtains, and across fences, their eyes wide as if frozen in the moment. The sirens in the distance were faint but growing, and yet Kerren did not flinch. She was fueled by a sense of power that made her blind to reason. Every instinct screamed at me to protect Grandma, but the danger was real and immediate, and I had no choice but to think fast. Grandma's chair wobbled slightly on the uneven path, and I reached to steady it, feeling her heartbeat hammering against my hand. "Grandma, it is okay, just stay calm," I whispered, and she nodded, her lips pressed together, as if steeling herself for whatever might come. Kerren's gun hand shook slightly in the morning light, betraying a crack in her perfect composure, but she was still terrifyingly dangerous. The absurdity of the no-wheel zone sign burned in my mind, its yellow letters mocking the helplessness in front of us. This was no longer a petty HOA dispute. This was a life-threatening moment where reason had been thrown out the window and only fear remained. My mind raced, looking for options. Escape seemed impossible, and negotiation clearly futile. Kerren took a step closer, her voice lowering into a dangerous hiss. "I'm giving you one last warning." And Grandma's chair scraped against the pavement, a sound that echoed like a warning bell. I could feel the tension in the air, almost tangible, as if the neighborhood itself was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable. I remembered every story Grandma had told me about standing up to unfairness, how she had always taught me that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. And now we were living that lesson in the most terrifying way possible. The world narrowed down to Kerren, her gun, and the frail figure, my grandmother, who refused to shrink despite the danger. I tried to speak again, my voice steadier this time. "Kerren, please, just put the gun down. You don't have to do this." And for a moment the world hung suspended between chaos and calm, and then Kerren laughed, a short, bitter bark that sent chills down my spine. "Do you really think I will back down?" she said, and in that moment I knew nothing I said would reach her, not her pride, not her obsession with control, nothing. The sirens were closer now, a faint wail in the distance, but Kerren's attention was entirely fixed on us, and I realized that if help was going to come, it would not arrive in time to stop what could happen in the next few heartbeats. Every option I could imagine seemed inadequate, and my chest tightened with a mix of fear and fury. Grandma looked at me, her eyes steady and full of determination. "We cannot let her win," she whispered. And in that instant I knew that survival meant more than just avoiding harm. It meant confronting the absurdity and cruelty of someone who had placed herself above decency. Kerren's face twisted into a sneer as she adjusted her grip on the gun, oblivious to the storm that was quietly gathering around her. The moment stretched long and heavy until finally the distant wail of police sirens drew nearer, and Kerren's gaze flickered toward the approaching sounds and then back at us, and I felt a flicker of hope that justice might arrive before it was too late. But I also knew that Kerren was unpredictable and dangerous, and that the fight for Grandma's safety had only just begun. The morning light continued to glint off the windows and leaves, but the peace of the neighborhood was shattered irreparably, and the absurd tyranny of the no-wheel zone had been made terrifyingly real and immediate, and I realized with a cold certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. The police sirens grew louder, but Kerren did not flinch, her chest heaving, as if she had conquered the world. And I knew in that moment that reason had no place here. Grandma gripped the wheelchair handles tighter, her knuckles white, but her eyes were fierce and unyielding, and I felt a surge of protectiveness that made my stomach coil with fear and determination. The officers arrived finally, their uniforms crisp and voices firm. But Kerren laughed a high, cruel sound that made the hairs on my neck stand up, and she waved a gun threateningly like it was an extension of her power. "Step back, this is none of your business." She spat at the officers, and they hesitated a fraction too long, her arrogance filling the space like smoke, and I realized that her influence over the neighborhood had made even the law pause. Grandma whispered under her breath, "We cannot let her terrorize us anymore," and I nodded, squeezing her hand, knowing that confrontation was not enough, that Kerren's ego would not be tamed by warnings or authority. The officers finally managed to coax her to lower the gun, but her defiance had not faltered. She grinned venomously, as if she had won some invisible victory, and the absurdity of the no-will zone sign now felt like a weapon forged in cruelty. Once the officers escorted her inside the house, she slammed the door, and we could hear her shouting to the walls about rules and respect and control, and I felt my chest tighten with a mix of fear and anger. Neighbors slowly emerged from behind curtains and fences, their faces etched with worry and disbelief, and I realized that Kerren had cast a shadow over the entire street, one that would not dissipate quickly. Every story I had heard about her petty tyranny, her obsession with control, her cruel satisfaction in others' discomfort was now painfully real, and I felt the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders. I wheeled Grandma back toward the house, her movement slow but determined, and I tried to reassure her. "We will not let her do this again." And she nodded, a faint smile on her lips, a mixture of exhaustion and pride. The sunlight that seemed so warm in the morning now fell harsh and revealing, as if it illuminated every flaw in the neighborhood and in Kerren's delusions. Over the next days, her harassment escalated in subtle and petty ways. First, letters slid under doors full of threats and fines for things no one else could understand, and complaints filed with the HOA that twisted facts and exaggerated minor incidents into supposed violations. It became clear quickly that direct confrontation was futile, that Kerren's sense of entitlement was a wall too thick to break with words or appeals, and that the only way forward would be to outsmart her. Grandma insisted on helping me document everything, every threat, every absurd claim, every moment that revealed her obsession with control and cruelty, and I marveled at her resilience. Her frailty contrasted with her determination, creating a strange paradox of vulnerability and strength. We recorded videos, discreetly took photographs of the signs and letters, and kept meticulous notes of every interaction, knowing that at the moment came we would need evidence that could not be denied. Kerren strutted to the neighborhood with the pride of a general surveying her conquered land, waving at neighbors with a smile that did not reach her eyes, and I felt a surge of anger and strategy building inside me. I realized that her greatest weakness was not her weapon or her influence, but her arrogance, her obsession with appearances, and the satisfaction she derived from the fear she instilled in others. One afternoon I approached her at the HOA meeting, the room tense with the quiet hum of gossip and suppressed rage, and I tried reasoning. "Kerren, this is getting out of hand." And she laughed dismissively, a sound sharp and condescending that made everyone flinch. "Out of hand," she mocked. I am only enforcing what is right and proper, and I saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes that she knew she was being watched, but her pride would not allow her to step back. The meeting ended with her declaring victory, her smug smile cemented in place, while the rest of us seated silently knowing that direct appeals were useless, and that the only option was to plan and wait to strike at the core of her arrogance. Grandma whispered as we left the room, "Patience is our ally," and I nodded, understanding that this battle was no longer about immediate justice, but about carefully orchestrated strategy that would make her undo herself. Over the next few days, I studied her patterns, her obsession with perfection, her eagerness to broadcast her victories to the neighborhood, and her disdain for anyone who questioned her authority. And I realized that every small action she took was a thread that could be pulled. Every time she finned a neighbor, every time she yelled, or waved a gun, the proof accumulated, and I knew that patience and precision would be our weapon against her. At night, we reviewed the recordings of photos and notes, Grandma resting her frail body against the couch, while I scrolled through every detail and noticed inconsistencies in her claims, patterns that could be exposed. Her ego made her predictable, her need for recognition made her reckless, and I felt the first spark of hope that the tables could be turned not with confrontation but with cunning. Kerren continued her daily parade through the streets, each shout and gesture, each absurd threat adding to the mountain of evidence we quietly gathered, and with each passing day my resolve hardened that the woman who had terrified my grandmother would be unmasked publicly and deservedly humiliated for the cruelty she had wielded like a sword. I realized then that winning would not be about words or direct action, but about exposing her in a way that left her no choice but to face the consequences. Her arrogance would be the trap we set, and the world would witness her downfall. Grandma squeezed my hand one evening, her voice soft but firm. "Do not let her break your spirit." And I understood fully that courage and cleverness together were our only allies. The days stretched into tense anticipation, the neighborhood wary and quiet under Kerren's watchful, I yet unaware that her reign of fear was being meticulously documented, that her every move was a step toward her undoing, and the feeling of inevitability began to build. Every encounter became a test, every conversation a potential weapon, and I felt the surge of purpose that comes from knowing that the moment of reckoning was approaching. Finally, I wheeled Grandma past her house, once more checking the absurd, Noel's own sign that mocked us all, and I whispered, soon. Her eyes met mine steady and full of trust, and I knew that the stage was set for the plan that would turn Kerren's pride against her, and that the next chapter would decide the fate of our neighborhood and the safety of the woman I loved most in the world. The morning air was sharp and bright, and I wheeled Grandma past the absurd, Noel's own sign, once more, her eyes steady on me, as if reading my thoughts, and I felt a surge of determination that made my pulse quicken. The plan had been in motion for days, every interaction, every recorded threat, every absurd complaint meticulously cataloged, and now it was time for Kerren to face the consequences of her arrogance. I approached her with a calm. I did not feel my voice steady as I said, "Kerren, you might want to look at your phone." And she sneered, glancing at me as if I were a child trying to play a game beyond her understanding. Her phone buzzed insistently, and she waved it away until I said again, "Seriously, check it." And the screen lit up with messages, notifications, videos that she could not ignore. Neighbors had begun sharing the footage of her threats, her ridiculous fines, her moments of cruelty captured from angles she never anticipated, her every word and gesture exposed for the world to see, and a low murmur of realization spread to the neighborhood like wildfire. Kerren's confident smirk faltered, her eyes widening in disbelief as she scrolled through evidence of herself brandishing a gun at a frail elderly woman issuing fines for imaginary offenses and boasting to neighbors about her tyrannical control. The officers who had previously hesitated arrived, once more their presence firm and unwavering, and this time Kerren's bluster met authority that would not bend. She stammered her words, twisting in panic as reality closed in around her. Grandma watched silently, her eyes filled with quiet triumph, and I felt the warmth of vindication ripple through me, knowing that the fear that had gripped us for so long was finally dissolving. Kerren tried to speak, her voice rising sharp and desperate. "This is a misunderstanding, but the recordings were indisputable. Her arrogance had left a permanent trail. Her obsession with control had created a perfect record of every transgression, and the entire neighborhood was watching. Friends, neighbors, even strangers from nearby communities began arriving, cameras in hand, documenting the spectacle, and her confidence crumbled under the weight of undeniable truth. I wheeled Grandma closer to the scene, her frail hand steady on the handles, and whispered, "It is over, Kerren." and for the first time she faltered, completely unable to mask the fear and humiliation that spread across her face. She stumbled backward, her perfect composure, shattered her gun, confiscated her threats meaningless against the evidence arrayed against her and the murmurs of justice rising around her. The HOA board arrived, flanked by officers, their expressions stern and no longer susceptible to her manipulations, and Kerren realized with horror that her influence had vanished. Her reign of petty terror ended by the very arrogance that had fueled it. The videos were played aloud, every threat, every cruel word, every ridiculous claim about rules enforced, with fear broadcast for all to see, and laughter and sighs of relief mingled in the air as the absurdity and danger of her behavior was laid bare. Neighbors stepped forward one by one, sharing stories of intimidation and finds of petty cruelty, and Kerren could not respond. Each accusation solidified the undeniable pattern of tyranny she had created. Grandma's chair rolled steadily toward the center of the gathering, her presence commanding respect and admiration, and I felt a surge of pride for a woman whose courage had never wavered despite the danger. Kerren tried to retreat, slamming doors and barricading herself inside her house, but the footage had already gone viral, the neighborhood, online, the authorities, all watching, and her desperate attempts to rewrite reality were futile. The sound of cameras clicking, the low hum of conversation, and the distant wail of sirens formed a chorus of accountability that echoed through the streets, and she was trapped by her own obsession with power. I could see the moment the realization hit her, the sheer weight of consequences she had ignored for so long crashing down in an instant, and her face twisted from fury to terror, her screams bouncing off walls that had once amplified her control. The absurd no-wheel zone sign that had terrified us now seemed comical and cruel, a monument to her failed attempt at dominance, and I felt a grim satisfaction, knowing that the fear it had inspired was finally dismantled. Grandma smiled faintly, her eyes bright with triumph, and I squeezed her hand. "We did it," I whispered, and she nodded, her lips pressed together with pride and relief, and I realized that courage, patience, and careful planning had combined to create a victory that brute force could never have achieved. Kerren was led away by authorities, her voice rising in futile protest, and the neighborhood erupted into murmurs of relief, laughter, and applause. The oppressive weight of her tyranny lifted at last. Children played again on the sidewalks, her rules meaningless, the absurd fear dissipating as sunlight warmed the lawn she had tried to dominate, and every neighbor knew that justice had arrived in a way that was public, undeniable, and entirely deserved. I wheeled Grandma slowly home, her frailty contrasted with the strength of her spirit, and I felt the weight of the ordeal lift from my shoulders as well. We passed the absurd sign one last time, and I took a photo knowing it would serve as a reminder of both the danger of unchecked arrogance and the power of courage and cleverness combined. Grandma chuckled softly. "No more rules for me," she said, and I laughed, feeling the tension of weeks dissolve into relief and joy, and I knew that our neighborhood was finally safe, and that Kerren's reign of terror was a cautionary tale no one would forget. The sun continued to glint off the windows and leaves the air warm and light, and for the first time in weeks the streets felt like a home again, and I realized that fear had been replaced by a sense of justice, patience, and community resilience, and that the absurd tyranny of the no-will zone had been permanently defeated. As we reached the front porch, Grandma looked up at me. "You kept your promise," she said, and I smiled, knowing that this was more than victory. It was proof that courage and cleverness could triumph over arrogance and cruelty, and that some battles, however terrifying, could end with the most satisfying of justice.